This video is all about the respiratory system. By the end of it, you should be able to describe the parts and functions of the respiratory system, any specialized tissues and cells that are part of the respiratory system, and other organ systems that interact with the respiratory system and how they interact. Again, we have lots of new vocabulary that goes along with each system. For the respiratory system, we have the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, including the goblet cells and the cilia, the bronchial tubes, the lungs, the diaphragm, and alveoli. Your respiratory system's main job is to exchange carbon dioxide from the blood with oxygen from the air to help the body get energy. It does this in the lungs. There are many organs of the respiratory system. They all work together to clean the air, warm it up, and moisten it before it reaches your lungs. So starting at your nose, inside your nose you have mucus. The mucus actually traps any yucky stuff before it can get down into your lungs. And then the cilia are these tiny hairs that will wave the mucus out, and then it will either go down into your stomach so that you can swallow it, which is gross, or you'll sneeze, or you might have a runny nose. Then you go down into your throat. Your throat is also called your pharynx. Basically, it's just a passageway for your lungs or your air to go down into your lungs. You also have a little flap called the epiglottis. This is your trachea or your windpipe. This is where mucus and cilia again trap the yucky stuff and move it up. We either cough or we swallow it, and because we don't want anything down in our lungs that shouldn't be there. It will make you very sick. The bronchial tubes separate the air into each one of the lungs, and then our lungs are made up of alveoli, which are tiny sacs. We're going to go into each one of these a little bit more in depth. So your pharynx is the scientific word for your throat. It is the common passageway to both the esophagus and the trachea. Your esophagus is where you have food that goes down into your stomach, and then your trachea is where we actually get air down into our lungs. We don't want air in our stomach, and we don't want food in our lungs. So we have the epiglottis, which is this cool little flap that when you swallow, it actually clamps down over your trachea, and it will stop any food or liquid from going down into your lungs. It's really cool. If you try this for a second, you cannot swallow and move air in and out of your lungs at the same time. So try it. Can you swallow and breathe at the same time? It should actually stop that flow of air so that you can't do those two things. The larynx is another word for your voice box. So it's located at the top of your trachea right here. Your trachea is this one right here. We'll talk about that in a second. But the cool thing about your larynx is that it's where your vocal cords are at. So you have these two vocal cords that stretch across your larynx, and they are kind of like rubber bands. And depending on how high-pitched or low-pitched the sound is that you're making, they'll either be tighter or looser. And when air moves across those, they'll vibrate and it will create sound waves, which is how you talk. Your trachea is another word for your windpipe. It's surrounded by rings of cartilage. So these blue rings are cartilage. Cartilage is sort of like bone, but it's more flexible, and it holds your trachea open. The trachea is also lined with special cells called goblet cells and cilia that help protect your lungs. Goblet cells are special epithelial cells. Remember, those are the cells that are on the surfaces of your body, either inside or outside, and they usually help protect you. So these goblet cells basically line your respiratory system. They also line your digestive systems, and they produce mucus. Mucus is kind of gross, but it actually has a really important function. It traps bacteria and dust before it can enter the lungs. So you can see down here that these goblet cells, they're called that because they look like a goblet. A goblet is like a big fancy cup, and it basically secretes or produces mucus that can then be oozed out to trap all of that yucky stuff before it gets down into your lungs. Cilia are tiny hairs. So if you think about this as one single cell, they're these little teeny tiny microscopic hairs, and they can wave or wiggle to move the mucus up or down. okay? And then here is a electron scanning microscope picture of the cilia. And basically they go upward, up, 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 and out of your throat so that you can either cough it, swallow it, spit it out, whatever it is, so that it keeps all of that stuff out of your lungs. The bronchial tubes are at the bottom of your trachea, and they basically just branch into two areas, one going to your left lung and one going to your right lung, and then they keep branching smaller and smaller. Those smaller branches are called bronchioles, and really they just direct air into each one of your lungs. If you've ever had bronchitis before, or if you suffer from asthma, you will know that mucus can be good to keep us healthy, but also it can make us really sick and it makes it harder for us to breathe. So if someone has bronchitis, it just means a swelling of your bronchial tubes. And asthma is kind of like that, except for it's triggered by some kind of an outside thing, like maybe pollen or an allergy that you have. So when it's triggered, your body's immune system goes into overdrive, and it will think that something is going to bother you. And so it will reduce the space that you have to breathe by closing down those bronchial tubes and making them narrower and narrower. It will also produce a whole bunch more mucus. And so it reduces that airflow and it makes it really, really hard to breathe. Somebody with asthma usually has an inhaler, which has a special medicine that helps to open those back up. And that is one way that they can help to control their asthma. So you can see the big difference in size between those two. All right, your lungs. This is one of the main organs of our respiratory system. They're big organs, and their job is to exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen. So when our bodies break down food, they produce carbon dioxide. Too much carbon dioxide is not good for us, so we need to breathe it out. And in order for us to get energy from our food, we need oxygen. So it's just like if you have to feed a fire, right? A fire needs fuel and it needs oxygen. So the fuel is our food, and the oxygen helps our food to be broken down, just like oxygen helps a fire to burn. So if we didn't have any oxygen, we wouldn't be able to get any energy from our food. So keep that in mind. We also have a big diaphragm underneath our lungs, and that helps us to breathe. This is a X-ray of your lungs, so you can see how many little tiny bronchioles are in there. Your lungs are pretty cool. First of all, that diaphragm that I was talking about, it's a big muscle that lives underneath your lungs. And when you breathe in, it turns from a dome to be more flat, and it pulls down on your lungs. And that reduces the air pressure inside your lungs and allows air to flow from the outside in to try to balance out the air pressure. And then you expel your breath by basically relaxing your diaphragm and breathing out. Every day you breathe about 20,000 times, and your rib muscles also help you breathe. So in between each one of your rib muscles, you have intercostal muscles. And if you ever get like a side ache or a cramp, that's because those rib muscles in between are kind of cramping up a little bit. And so stretching out will help. But your rib muscles also, when you breathe, kind of tighten up and constrict, and they help move your ribs up and away from your lungs to get even more room into your lungs so you can breathe. Inside your lungs, they are made of little tiny sacs called alveoli. They're little air sacs. So little tiny balloons that they kind of remind me of grapes, and their job is to exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen. Every single alveoli is surrounded by little tiny blood vessels called capillaries. Inside those, the capillaries actually take the oxygen in and they expel the carbon dioxide. So this is the little blood vessel that's flowing right past one of those air sacs. And then this is the inside of the capillary that is full of oxygen when you breathe in. And when you breathe out, it has more CO2. Your lungs have 300 million alveoli, enough to fill a tennis court if we smushed them all out. The surface area would be the same as a tennis court. So at the end of this video, you should be able to answer the main function of the respiratory system, some of the parts or organs of the respiratory system, and what they do, specialized tissues and cells, and how other organ systems interact with the respiratory system and how.